every day you and I get bombarded with negative news. Just like the body becomes what we eat, the mind becomes what we're putting in. It is important to listen to stories that not only gives you hope, but also inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we're interviewing experts who will break down the solutions to the world's most pressing problems. And I promise you, if you listen to this podcast, you will not only stay informed, but you will also feel more energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Great.com is a philanthropic project where we're donating 100% of our profit towards the most effective cause areas like protecting the rainforest, funding climate change technology. And the best thing that you can do to help that mission of donating even more money would be to subscribe to the channel. The topic of today is how to make sure that democracy is actually a democracy. And to understand more about that, we have invited Mark Weisbrot from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, CEPR. So I want to say, Mark, welcome to this interview.
Thanks for inviting me.
Mark, help us understand, what would you say that the problem that you guys are trying to tackle and deal with, what is the problem?
Well, we deal with a number of problems, but a fundamental approach is to try and increase public understanding of some of the most important policy decisions that affect people's lives, so that these policies, the ones that are really wrong, can be changed. And a major focus, of course, for us is economic policy, because, I'm an economist, but also a U.S. foreign policy, since the United States is the most powerful country in the world and influences the lives of billions of people, and other issues, including climate.
Mark, can you tell us about any research that you're doing right now that you think is interesting for people to understand?
Yes, well, we did do some research on climate in recent years that I think is relevant and it did stimulate a little bit of literature, actually, of more academic research. And that's the question of work hours. It turns out that there's a relationship that people hadn't really looked at previous to our study. The first one was in 2006. A relationship between work hours and climate. So, for example, you have Western Europe. We found uses, at that time it was about 25%, or it has 25% less carbon emissions than the United States, and a big part of this is because they work less. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you look at the 1970s, the United States and Western Europe had about the same amount of working hours per week and per year. You count holidays and vacations, and you look at how much they work. And the thing is, as your economy becomes more productive, the society makes a social choice, and the choice is: do you take this increased productivity in the form of more consumption? You buy bigger houses, more cars, and so on, or do you take it in more holidays and more time off and keep your consumption levels more similar? And so we didn't have any reduction in work hours since 70, and Europe was about 50%. That's why they have, an average vacation, I think, mandated of 4.6 weeks. We don't have any actually mandated by law. And so, and more holidays and so on, shorter work weeks. So this is really big because you see, obviously, we all know that greenhouse gas emissions are directly related to consumption.
Just as a contrast, what would happen if your organization did not exist? Or organizations like yours, what would happen if those were not existing?
Well, in the United States, we have a whole set of problems. For example, you look at healthcare. Why do we spend twice as much as the other high-income countries, and we have worse health outcomes. This is a rich country, you know. Why do we spend so much on the military, more than most of the world put together? Why do we have so many wars? Why do we have so much poverty in one of the richest countries in the world? So, or you could make the comparison to the past. You could say, well, income per person in the U.S. or GDP per person in the U.S. is more than twice what it was in the 1960s. And yet at that time, it was common for a family with just one income at the median level to buy a house and send their kids to college, and they didn't come out with a huge debt. How can this be so hard today when the country has so much more income? This doesn't make any economic sense. So it's not because of changes in technology or because of what any other country is doing in the world. It's really because the rules that determine the distribution of income and wealth have really changed over the past 4 decades. So the United States has become a much more unequal society. You know, from 1973 to 2007, for example, when most of this took place, the top 1% of the income distribution got the majority of about 2/3, actually, of the income gains. So this is what we're dealing with. Now, how would the country be different if we didn't intervene, if we didn't exist? I think you said. And well, there are some issues where we really won. So, for example, when we first started 21 years ago, you had the vast majority of Americans under 50 believed that they would never see their Social Security benefits. Now, Social Security in the United States, that's our public pension program. That's the biggest anti-poverty program we have. It keeps like 21 million people out of poverty right now. And it's not just seniors even, you know, there's children even that are benefiting from it. And so there was a real attack on the system, and nobody was really doing anything about it. The media was just running with this, these ideas that the system was going to go broke when the baby boom generation retired, which most of it's retired already. Obviously, it didn't happen. But nobody knew that then. This was all over the media, and it was completely false. And it wasn't. This is a good example, I think. I mean, I'll give you other examples, but this wasn't a question of, you know, economists or statisticians making different estimates. It was just everyone was using the same numbers. They all came from the trustees of the Social Security system. But there were people with a lot of money who wanted to privatize the system, and they managed to convince the journalists